Welcome to Session 2 of the Learning Path to Employment, the Early Years. My name is Jill Leonard. In this session, we are going to talk about creating a vision and a pathway to employment during the early years and at school. By the end of this session, you will be able to understand what you can do at home in the early years to begin the journey to employment. Understand and learn to use the tools that are available at school to improve employment outcomes, both during school and after graduation. And know what questions to ask when collaborating with the school system around employment. This is a short video with Joe Dale, and he's talking about how you can start that employment journey at home in the early years.
And I think this starts at 3 years of age for people with intellectual disabilities. And it starts at home. So I think we need to start by thinking about it at home and asking your sons and daughters with disabilities questions like, what do you want to be when you grow up? Just like you do with other children in your home. And if they say princess or cowboy when they're 5 years old, that's okay. It's the seed that gets planted that matures over time, and to keep that alive. There's no magic wand when a child turns 21 that says, poof, you're all of a sudden ready to work. It just doesn't happen to anybody, let alone people with intellectual disabilities. We tend to deal so much with the problems for our kids with intellectual and developmental disabilities that we forget about some of the natural, inherent things that they have to learn growing up. I saw a situation once with a young man in a workshop, in a warehouse, who had an intellectual disability, and at break, he and his buddies, there were people without disabilities, used to stand on the back deck and spit, see who could spit the furthest. Well, this was a natural thing in that environment that the guys did, right? Well, one day he walked in the office and he spit, and his buddy went, what the heck are you doing? You want to get fired? So that, they have to see that from their peers and in these kind of relationships as they grow up and so forth. But these are the types of things that employers are looking for. Some communications, whether it's verbal or not, positive attitude and good manners, and how to take directions, even if you don't like it. And we see this over and over again as people with disabilities not liking a certain part of their job. They can sabotage their job, they can just refuse to do it, they can say, I'm going for a break now, it's too bad, whatever, but it's not acceptable in the workplace. And this is what businesses don't want to deal with. Kids have to have responsibilities at home. They have to understand those responsibilities, and families need to kind of assign and teach chores. Some of those should be assigned and the child left alone to learn to do them independently. Some of them should be assigned to be done with mom or dad or with a sibling to be showing the teamwork that comes with it. Kids need to be rewarded appropriately, and they have to learn that sequence of consequence. Chores equals reward or money, money equals savings, savings equals purchasing and buying, and having not everything delivered to you just because you're there.
So, what can we do at home in the early years? As Joe Dale mentioned, we can start by creating an expectation and a vision for future employment. This can be as simple as asking your family member, what do you want to be when you grow up? We can encourage that understanding and the relationship between chores or work and money, between money and savings and buying something that you need or want. We can also support responsibility in our children by assigning and teaching our kids to do chores around the house, and then we can hold them accountable for completing those chores. We can build independence by giving them the opportunity to complete tasks on their own or with friends or siblings, by teaching them to use public transit and Uber, and by helping them develop money skills. We can also build teamwork and cooperation by encouraging them to participate in group activities or team sports. And we can develop the skills that are related to social competence. And those are skills like communication, good manners, good personal hygiene, positive attitude, and the ability to take direction from others, especially when you don't want to. Take a moment just to reflect on these questions. What are you currently doing at home to help prepare your family member for employment? And what is it that you can start doing? Inclusion at school has a really important role to play in the journey to employment. It provides that opportunity to learn from peers who do not have a disability. This is an opportunity to learn some of those soft skills, like the social competence skills that we just talked about. It allows children to develop social capital with peers of the same age. And social capital is really that tangible or intangible value of our relationships and networks, be they at school, be they in the community, or be they with family. And you know, if you want to think about a tangible value of these networks, think about accessing network opportunities that are related to employment. Some of your students' peers might be hiring managers down the road, or they might have families who have businesses. And as we know, most jobs are filled without being posted. So we want to help our kids get access to these networks. Inclusion also provides the opportunity for students to work alongside students without disabilities or with different disabilities and get to experience the value of diversity and inclusion before they enter the workforce. And lastly, it supports a vision for employment, because that's what everybody else is working towards. And it holds schools accountable for supporting a plan for employment. In Ontario today, it is not always possible to access good quality inclusive education. But don't let that stop you from seeking out opportunities to gain that value of inclusion. Students in a congregated setting can access inclusive environments at school in several ways. They can take some classes in the open stream. Think about art classes, music classes, gym classes. They can join clubs. They can join sports teams. In high school, the sports include a para-category for intellectual disabilities. So your child does not have to be a star athlete in order to participate. And they can volunteer. Just make sure that you find those ways for them to have the opportunity to be included with their peers at school. Now that we've talked about some of the things that you can do at home, we're going to turn our attention to the opportunities that are available to engage schools in this employment journey. So, what do we know about employment during the school years? In session 1, you heard that where parents were expecting employment as an outcome, the job seekers were 5 times more likely to be successful. Having at least one paid job during high school was a fantastic predictor for future employment success. You heard that building social capital, and we just talked about this, both at school and in the community, is essential for job preparedness, and it provides the benefits of inclusion that we just talked about. And you also heard that employers are not willing to train social competencies. Knowing all of these things, what can we look for during the school years? We can make sure that a job is identified on the IEP. This is what helps set expectations, and it drives the curriculum. You can insist on good co-op and volunteer opportunities, seek summer and part-time employment, and encourage participation in extracurricular activities. These are all going to help build job preparedness, develop social competencies, and build social capital. As we talk about the opportunities at school, it's important that we sort of understand the framework. So just to review the 3 possible graduation outcomes. The first is the Ontario Secondary School Diploma. And this requires 16 compulsory credits, 12 optional credits, the literacy requirement, 2 online credits, and 40 hours of community involvement. The second is the Ontario Secondary School Certificate, which requires 7 compulsory credits and 7 optional credits. And the third is the Certificate of Accomplishment, which is awarded to students who leave school without fulfilling the requirements for either of the other two. So as you can see, the requirements are significantly different. And so it's not surprising that the available paths after graduation are also going to vary significantly. As a result, it's really important that you develop that vision as early as possible to ensure that your student is working on the appropriate path. After graduation, there are 3 proposed pathways that schools will sort of direct you if you have a student with an intellectual disability. The first is towards post-secondary education. So this would include your sort of degree and diploma programs. But these will often require prerequisites that won't be met with either the Ontario Secondary School Certificate or the Certificate of Accomplishment. But it also includes college experience programs like CICE, which is the Community Integration Through Cooperative Education. And this is a program that's offered at many Ontario colleges. There are also collaborative partnership vocation programs, such as the George Brown Vocational Program and the Humber Culinary Program. And these college experiences don't require transcripts, but they will require interviews, and they definitely require students to be able to navigate both the campus and their way to and from school. The college experience programs are generally just that. They're an experience. They're not necessarily a stepping stone to employment, but they do vary significantly, so it's worth investigating. The second pathway that you will be directed to is community day supports. And these are the segregated programs. They include employment training programs, individual community supports, that would be something that you would pay for with passport dollars, volunteering, and Parks and Recs programs. Where the schools lack any expectation for either the continued education or the employment pathway, in other words, where we haven't identified those as pathways for our students, families are going to be encouraged to follow this pathway. And they'll be encouraged to register for DSO, which is the Disability Services Ontario wait lists. They will be told to sign up for passport funding and for ODSP, the Ontario Disability Support Program. Unfortunately, this pathway is not generally a stepping stone to employment. This is a stepping stone into the welfare system. And the third pathway is employment. And as we discussed in session 1, when we talk about employment, we really want to make sure that we're clear about what our expectation is if this is our pathway. We want to talk about employment that includes people with intellectual disability. In other words, we've got people with and without intellectual disability working together. We've got employment that pays a competitive wage and provides meaningful contributions and value to the business, offers opportunity for advancement, and equal access to benefits and opportunity. Choosing the pathway defines the curriculum that schools deliver. This is another reason why it's important to have a vision for the future and identify the possible pathways as early as you can. Now, take a minute to think about the opportunities available for your family member after graduation. Have you thought or talked about life after graduation? Do you know what their vision is? There's no set timeline. Wherever you are is okay. You just need to think about it now so that you can start to develop a path. This is a short video about what schools can provide. Now, note that although co-op opportunities are generally available, the quality of the co-op can vary greatly, and the transition programs, such as the one that's going to be talked about in this video, are not generally available. They are specific to their region. But it's important to understand that these things are possible, because when we understand what's possible, we've got some opportunities that we can start asking for.
Well, in our community, we have the opportunity for students to get involved in co-op opportunities. If the educator's on board and they're working with the community living and vice versa, then it becomes sort of a seamless process where Students would do a co-op placement. When I was teaching, I would ask them, what they wanted to do, look at their skill sets, maybe make some suggestions, and then try to make those connections. And then once the student was through that co-op program for the school year, then they go into the Summer Employment Transitions Program, where they would be getting paid employment in the community. So ultimately, if students were able to start this at age 16 or 17, they stayed till 21, they had 3 or 4 years of opportunities for co-op, their summer employment, they're building a resume, etc.
I think we should all be insisting a job is an identified goal in the IEPs, and what we see in most schools is probably less than 15% of IEPs have any kind of relationship to employment identified in the IEP in terms of a goal. And think of it this way, if you change the goal, then the path has to change also.
Families in supporting that need to be involved by asking their son or daughter, how did the day go? Communicating with the teacher and the teacher communicating with them as to how things are going. The summer employment program providing those reports and input.
What are the opportunities at the school level that are supported by policies and the curriculum, and that will help frame a journey for employment after graduation? We are going to talk about 3 specific opportunities. The first is the use of planning tools. These include individual pathway plans, the individual education plan, and the IEP transition plan. The second is the opportunity for community agency involvement at the school level through something called the Integrated Transition Plan Protocol. It's a bit of a mouthful. And the third is the opportunity for work experience through co-op placements, volunteer hours, and summer jobs. We're going to look at how we can leverage each of these opportunities to help build towards employment after graduation. First, we're going to start with the school system planning tools. The All About Me portfolio, which is for grades K to 6, and the individual pathway plan, which is for grades 7 to 12, are planning tools that are for all students, including students with special needs. They're created by students and they belong to them. These programs will prompt students to use an inquiry process that's built on 4 questions: knowing yourself, exploring opportunities, making decisions and setting goals, and achieving and making transitions. The evidence that you gather in going through these programs helps to support students as they move from grade to grade, to make transitions from elementary to high school, from high school to post-secondary. And they should be used to help inform the IEP and the transition plan that we're going to talk about next. Every school is required to create an individual pathway plan for each student in the school. School boards will use a bunch of different software, so you need to sort of investigate the software that's being used, try and get a login, passwords, and a tutorial on how to use it. The platforms are they're designed for pathways for students who are accessing the curriculum and are working towards an Ontario Secondary School diploma. But if you focus on the employment dashboards that are available on these programs, you'll find that they include jobs and apprenticeships that do not require an OSSD or post-secondary education. And if you use this information, you can work with the school team to determine what the skills are that are required to be successful at the jobs that you've identified, and you can build your planning around that. The IEP transition plan. If we don't know where we're going, how will we know if we get there? As with the individual pathway plan, the IEP transition plan is a way to shape the pathway for your student and help create a bridge for any barriers that may reveal themselves. The transition plan is part of the IEP and is a legal document. It's usually located just at the back of your IEP, and it has to be stored in your student's OSR. And it's a document that schools are mandated by legislation to provide. The transition plan will contain goals, actions, persons responsible, and timelines. If a student doesn't have any need for support, then it will just say no actions are required. When there are transition needs identified for a student, the school board staff has to make sure that there is a plan in place that addresses those needs. So make sure that your vision for the future is reflected in that plan so that any of the goals and actions are consistent with that vision. Work with your school team to use this document in conjunction with the IEP to identify the skills that your student needs in order to meet the prerequisites, for instance, at a job that you've identified, or just the skills that they need to be employable, like some of those social competency skills that we've talked about. Plans are often created by teachers using a drop-down menu, so that means that they've got predetermined choices. You need to make sure that the goals and actions are well defined and that they're relevant to your vision. So an example of this, you might see something like develop self-advocacy skills in the actions section. This is a great goal, but it's not an action. It doesn't describe what they're going to do to develop these skills. So review the document with a critical eye and ensure that the actions are very specific. Like other school tools, this is something that needs to be developed collaboratively with the school team. It needs to include details so that you can hold the people responsible accountable. And it needs to be subject to regular review and revision. You want this document to grow with your vision. Next, we're going to look at the opportunities to involve community agencies and organizations at the school level to create a path for employment. The Integrated Transition Planning Protocol is a protocol that supports the involvement of community agencies and organizations at the school level. It's a collaboration between the Ministry of Education and the Ministry of Children, Community and Social Services. This protocol aims for all who support high school students, 14 years and older, who are identified with a developmental disability, to work collaboratively to facilitate a smooth transition from school to post-secondary pathways. The IPRC statement is a really good starting point for integrated planning because it identifies students' strengths and needs, and it may also make some program or service recommendations. Some of the people who should be involved in integrated transition planning include principals, educators, students and their families, and others like community service agencies and healthcare providers. You will find that some schools are very connected to community agencies and external supports, but others are not. So if you have a school that is not connected to the community agencies, you need to create that open line of communication with the school about your needs. What are the issues that may prevent your student from being successful? Is it funding? Is it services? Is it programs, etc.? Your school can then work in partnership with you to make those connections with the agencies and get them involved in this transition planning. And again, this needs to be something that's ongoing. You start it early. You want to make sure that it reflects your vision, and you want to review it regularly. Now that we've talked about the planning tools, just take a moment to think about these tools and what questions you might ask your school to make sure that the tools are in place and that they're working for your family member. After you finish this session, make sure that you take a moment to go through the Family Resource Guide for more ideas on questions that you can ask. And when you're using these planning tools, remember that you bring the knowledge about your family member. You know what their skills are, you know their dreams, you know their networks and relationships. You also understand the necessary supports. You're a really important partner in this process. Now we're going to look at work opportunities that are available in high school to gain valuable work experience. Work experience and co-op placements provide an opportunity for all students to learn about themselves, about their communities, and about the nature of employment. Co-ops will all have a learning plan that outlines the learning goals and activities that your student is going to experience in their placement. You need to make sure that that plan is consistent with the goals, strengths, and needs that you've identified for your student. And you can look to the IPRC and the IEP and the transition plan attached to it to identify some of these goals and strengths. Because work experience can affect how your student feels about things, it might affect their interests and goals, and it can also affect the perceptions of the student by teachers and parents, coaches. You want to make sure that after a placement, you take the time to use the information that you've gathered from that placement to help shape the next year's transition plan and IEP. Volunteer hours are only required if you are pursuing an Ontario secondary school diploma, but that doesn't mean that you shouldn't advocate for them if you are not. If your student is not on that path, I think it's still useful because it provides that opportunity for work experience and for engaging with the community. You want to make sure, though, that when you are looking at volunteer opportunities, that they align with your student's interest. You don't need to take every volunteer opportunity that's offered. Find ones that they're interested in, that are outside of school, and that are similar to the types of volunteer activities that students without intellectual disability are doing. As we've said before, summer jobs and part-time employment are some of the best predictors of future employment. Schools often don't provide an opportunity for summer employment, but they may have connections and relationships with community agencies that do. This provides an opportunity to build relationships between schools and developmental and employment service providers in the community. We will provide some examples of where those types of relationships have been built between schools and community agencies in Session 3. Now that we've talked about these work experience opportunities, what kind of questions would you ask to make sure that these are in place and working for your student? Remember again that you are the best source of information about your family member. Don't be shy to ask questions and look at the opportunities with a critical eye. And again, after this session, if you look in our family resource guide, you will find some more examples of questions that you might like to ask. We've talked a lot about the importance of families collaborating with schools, but it's important to understand specifically what the role of families is. The role of families is to increase expectations. You want to support a pathway for your student to living a good life. The role of families is to plan. Start early in understanding and supporting your family members' dreams and goals and your own expectations related to their employment. Educate yourself. You need to scale up your knowledge around employment and the stakeholders, and taking this course is a really great start. Ask for help. Families can't be expected to do this on their own. You need to know who to ask for help and what supports to request. You must be clear about what it is that you want. Hold stakeholders responsible. Demand that stakeholders in school systems and community agencies do their part. Develop relationships. Families need to develop relationships and networks with the people and services that have the skills to provide the support that they need. Families can't be expected to carry out all of these roles. Demonstrate resilience. Don't give up when things don't work. Try it a different way. Act with a united voice around employment. Develop a common knowledge and language around employment so that stakeholders are held to account and they're moved to improve. When we are all asking for the same thing, using the same language, we're bound to see change. Families need to hold schools accountable, and the way that you can do this is by knowing what you can ask for from the education system. Families should expect schools to develop an IEP and transition plan with objectives that are targeted at employment. Support them in searching for community supports to get a paid job during their high school years. Provide co-op placements outside of school in diverse businesses. Provide support in obtaining 40 compulsory volunteer hours, even if they aren't compulsory on your pathway. And develop a curriculum and deliver it to build the soft skills that you've identified in the IEP, like social competencies. They should also be obtaining support from service agencies and school system professionals to build the transition planning in the early years. When we started this session, we had the following outcomes: to understand what families can do at home in the early years and throughout the school year to start the journey to employment, to understand the specific tools that schools can use and opportunities that they can facilitate to improve student employment outcomes during school and after graduation, and to understand and think about the questions to ask when collaborating with the school. How would you assess yourself against these outcomes? What did you take away from this session? I hope that you got a lot. As a wrap-up, think about one thing you can do tomorrow to develop a vision for employment for your family member. This doesn't have to be a big step. Maybe it's just looking at your current IEP. Maybe it's looking to see if there's a transition plan attached to it. Maybe it's signing on to the Pathway program and looking at the work opportunities that are identified there. The important thing is that you take one step. Please take the time to listen to Session 3. In Session 3, we talk about best practices for employment services and support, and knowing what questions to ask when identifying and accessing these services and supports. Thank you very much for joining us for this second session to the Learning Path for Employment, the Early Years.